Okay, good morning. I think we're ready to start. So thank you all for coming. My name is Edward Kent. I'm a principal developer at a company called AutoTrader, based up in Manchester. And I'll be talking to you today about how we democratize data, and specifically how we built a self-serve data platform. So the agenda for today, first of all, I'll give you a quick introduction to AutoTrader and how we use data. I'll talk about the new data platform that we built, specifically then how we enabled self-serve data with a product called Looker, and then I'll give you an example use case where we used Looker to kind of build a new product that previously wouldn't have been possible for us. So AutoTrader, you may have heard of us. We are the UK's largest digital automotive marketplace. So what that means is that we sit at the heart of the UK's vehicle buying and selling process. We bring together the largest, most engaged consumer audience looking for vehicles with the largest pool of vehicle sellers. In a similar way to eBay, we don't actually sell vehicles ourselves, but we bring together buyers and sellers and act as a marketplace for them. If you go to our homepage, you'll see something that looks like this. This is what we're most well known for. This is our online classified advert platform for new and used vehicles. You can do searches, you can do filters, apply for finance, all sorts of stuff. So as well as the classified adverts that we're most well known for, we offer a number of other services for both consumers and our retailers. For consumers, we offer things like valuations and price indicator flags to give confidence that the vehicle that you're searching for and buying is good value. We offer various reviews and rating systems so that people can kind of do research and use us as a kind of one-stop platform for their vehicle buying journey. Probably what you don't know is then on the other side as well, for our retailers, we offer a host of tools to help them manage their forecourt. We offer valuations products to help them price vehicles, source vehicles at the right price, tools for managing finance, and a bunch of tools as well for providing education to our retailers. So in terms of the scale that we operate, as of last year we were ranked as the 16th biggest website in the UK by number of page views, and that meant that in a single month we got over 55 million cross-platform visits. The stat I like most on that slide is that we received 4 times more automotive searches than Google. So hopefully it's clear from that we operate at quite a large scale, and operating at that sort of scale means that we also collect an awful lot of data. So I'd like to talk to you a bit about the way that we use data at AutoTrader. Before I do, though, it's worth just pointing out that the world as a whole has kind of embraced data quite rapidly over the last few years. We're more connected than ever before, particularly things like mobile technology means that we have facts and figures at our fingertips like we've never had before. I can be lying in bed, I can decide I want to look something up, pull out my mobile phone, search for it, and get the answer in a matter of seconds. We come to expect that level of access to data in our day-to-day lives, and increasingly we want to use that data to make decisions in real time. And that requirement for data and that hunger for data exists in the industry as well. Our customers, our retailers, want to use data to know kind of how many people are viewing my ads, what ads are performing well, this vehicle I'm selling, what's it worth, how should I price it, how should I source stock at the right price, how do I know which vehicles are going to sell most quickly. Consumers on our website also want to use data, whether they know it or not. They want to use data to see the adverts in their search that are most relevant to them. They want to know if are the vehicles that they're looking at good value. And the wider public also want to use data. We provide things like statistics on the best-selling cars, how different fuel types are selling, and are diesels as fast-selling as they used to be, etc. And that demand for data is only getting bigger and bigger. But getting access to data is hard. Historically, to get access to data meant getting access to various operational SQL databases, increasingly NoSQL databases as well. You've got to navigate quite complex schemas. You've got to know how to join the right fields together to get the answers that you're looking for. And this data is often full of complexity and subtleties. Unless you're vastly familiar with the data and the domain in which it sits, it's quite easy to draw wrong conclusions from data. Another problem that we've had is that often data isn't retained historically at the granularity that you would like. So it could be that you can answer a question right now, but you can't see it trended over time. And then finally, increasingly in the last few years, we've become more aware about personal data and retaining PII. GDPR means that we have to think very carefully about this and think very carefully about who has access to data and for what purpose. So historically, data at AutoTrader, and I'm sure this is true for many people, we use what we've done now, the legacy data warehouse, but referred to historically just as our data warehouse. And the way this works is that data sits in operational databases, is ingested into the data warehouse through various ETL processes. As part of that ingestion, it gets refined, it gets aggregated down, and at that aggregated level, it's then stored historically. For analysts and reports, they access the data warehouse and they query it directly to get the answers that they need. And this worked well for us for a number of years, but it has a number of problems. Specifically for us, because we were hosting our data warehouse on-premise, storing data at ever larger data sets gets increasingly expensive, prohibitively so. Because we're storing data at an aggregated level, making changes is quite difficult, and if you've not had the foresight to store data at the level of aggregation that you need, having that data historically is maybe not possible. And then finally, if you need to make changes, you need expert data warehouse developer expertise to help you make those changes. So with that in mind, about 3 years ago at AutoTrader, we set off to build a new data platform to address some of those concerns. And we formed the data engineering squad, which I'm now a part of. And that squad's mission was to empower AutoTrader and its customers to make informed, data-driven decisions and to democratize access to data and promote a self-service platform. And in building that platform, we wanted to achieve two things. First of all, we wanted to lower the bar to entry, so we wanted to make it easier than ever before for people to get access to our data, to be able to use it in the ways that are easy for them to use, without necessarily having high levels of technical expertise. But at the same time, we also wanted to raise the ceiling in terms of what we were capable of. We wanted to be able to run complex machine learning models and build data-driven products in ways that we'd never been able to do before. So how did we go about doing that? Well, first of all, we started thinking about the personas, the sorts of people who would have access to our platform and would get the most use out of it. And this list isn't exhaustive, but we kind of came up with these core personas that we thought would probably be a good starting point. So we've got our data analysts who are kind of creating reports on a day-to-day basis. Typically, kind of they're proficient in SQL, and they're the go-to for most people in the company who want access to data. They go via an analyst. Then we've got our data scientists. These are generally kind of people running more advanced types of analyses, machine learning models, etc. They're probably proficient in SQL, but then probably also in things like Python, Scala, etc. Then we've got our product leads. So these are people in charge of developing products at AutoTrader. Their demand for data is probably such that they're interested in something very specific, but at a very low level. So for example, if they're developing a new product, they may want to see, for example, how A/B tests are performing, and they want to really drill down into that data at a low level of detail. But at the same time, they're probably not so technically proficient. Maybe they don't even know SQL. And then we've got developers who are building data-driven products. So to build those sorts of products, they need access to the data as well. All of these personas have different requirements for the data, and they also have differing skill sets in terms of technical proficiency. But the common requirement there is that they all want to be able to self-serve. They all want to be able to get access to the data that they need directly without having to come and talk to a data warehouse developer or a data engineer or someone. They want to be able to get to that data directly themselves. So what I'll do now is just give you a brief overview of the data platform that we built and the various components. So the kind of core of our data platform is a cloud-based storage layer in which we've used a combination of Amazon S3 and Google's BigQuery. So the data that sits in the storage layer kind of exists in various degrees of refinement. Data drops into S3 in its rawest form and is then refined through various ETL pipelines into its most refined, trusted state. And the trusted data is then migrated into Google BigQuery, where it can be queried by our analytics stack. Data moves into that storage layer from operational databases, from Kafka, from Snowplow, which is our event tracking system. That ingestion process is orchestrated by a tool called Apache Airflow. That's an open source scheduling tool that we've had good success with that allows us to create complex dependencies using a concept called a directed acyclic graph, or a DAG, that allows us to make sure that the next phase of the data refinement process won't run until the previous phase has completed successfully. We then got a compute layer in which we've wholeheartedly embraced Apache Spark. It's a big data cluster computing framework. Using that compute layer, we can then refine the data using ETL pipelines and also build data-driven products. So in our case, we've been able to build products around things like supply and demand forecasting, used car valuation system, consumer recommendations, and a search relevance to make sure that the most relevant adverts filter to the top of our search results. And then finally, sitting on top of that is our analytics stack. In that, we've embraced two products that serve kind of very different purposes, but both provide self-serve access to data. And those are Looker and Databricks, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail. So firstly, Databricks. Databricks they build themselves as a unified analytics stack, but what that means is they provide access to a managed Apache Spark instance in which they provide a notebooking environment that makes it very easy to write ad hoc queries using languages like Scala, Python, R, and raw SQL. That notebooking environment is really good for interrogating the raw data and doing exploratory analysis. You can really kind of drill down into the data at its lowest level. It also provides tools for scheduling regular tasks and producing some fairly kind of basic dashboards. So Databricks is great, and it's been fully embraced, particularly by our data scientists and developers. The flip side with Databricks, though, is that it requires a fairly high level of technical proficiency to get started. So to fill that gap, we started using Looker. So Looker is a business analytics dashboarding tool. It provides access to data at the various different levels, including ready-made curated dashboards, right through to a model in which you can kind of explore data and drill down into it at a lower level. What we really liked about Looker was its modeling framework. So you define a data model using a configuration language called LookML, and that modeling layer becomes a single source of truth on your data. From that model, you can then build dashboards and allow people to explore the data in an ad hoc manner as well. Looker can connect to various different types of data store. In our case, we've used BigQuery, but it can connect to other types of SQL database as well. And quite crucially, using it is fast, flexible, and straightforward. People with no SQL experience can get started with it, and it's relatively intuitive to get going with. So how are we using Looker at AutoTrader? So we started using Looker just over a year ago, and in that time we've now got to the stage where we've got over 250 weekly active users, and that's actually a huge number. So AutoTrader is a company with about 800 employees in total, so that's nearly a third of the company using Looker on a weekly basis, which we think is a really big success story. On top of that, we've got over 95 content creators, so that's people creating dashboards. 530 dashboards have been created, 1,000 looks, which are like tiles on a dashboard, and 82 pieces of content are being emailed out on a schedule. The top chart there just shows weekly active users over time, over the last 6 months, and you can see early September we had a big jump. That's where we launched a new data-driven product with a dashboard, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. The bottom chart there just shows number of total users over time, and you can see the growth there has been pretty constant and pretty steady. So how did we achieve this? Well, first of all, we did our initial rollout. So we ran a proof of concept rollout with Looker. And we did so to answer a very specific question. In our case, we just launched a new product called Vehicle Check. Vehicle Check allows dealers to put a little flag on their adverts to say, this vehicle has been checked against a number of attributes, it's not been stolen, it's not got outstanding finance, etc. And it gives additional confidence to the buyer that this vehicle is a good vehicle to buy. So in launching this product, we wanted to kind of do so in a data-driven way and make sure that actually it was performing. It was giving an uplift on the adverts with that flag, and consequently adverts without were maybe not performing as well. So we needed to build some dashboards and we needed to analyze a lot of data. So this felt like a perfect opportunity to use Looker. We defined 3 different roles, each of which had access to the data in 3 different ways. So firstly, the viewer role, which is what the majority of our users would access the data as. The viewer role is like a dashboard viewer, so they can view pre-curated, pre-made dashboards. They can filter it in some preset ways, maybe change time windows, maybe filter the dashboard down to a specific customer's data, but not much beyond that. The second role was the Explorer role. So in addition to be able to view dashboards, explorers can also create dashboards and interrogate the raw data. So the Explorer role was granted to our product leads so that they could really get to grips with the data and understand it in the way that they wanted to. And then finally, the developer role. So this specifically is the LookML developer. So these are the people defining the underlying data model. And this role was given to our analysts. So we left them in charge of building up our LookML models. The next step was to get the data in a state where it could be accessed by Looker. So I talked about Google BigQuery being a cloud-based data warehouse. We had to then make sure that all the operational data systems that we needed data from, data was flowing from them via our data lake into BigQuery, where it could be accessed by Looker. The next step was to build up a set of what we deemed core models. So these core models represent kind of core business objects in the auto trader domain. So those are things like adverts, like stock, like events, like customers. So we built those core models using that underlying data. And then the final thing, with all that stuff in place, was we could start creating dashboards. And that dashboard creation process is the thing that kind of gives the end result. That looks very shiny, but actually that step, with all the other stuff in place, was really easy. And the POC was a success. We decided Looker was the right tool for the job, but it came with a number of challenges. And the first one was that we became a bit of a victim of our own success. We launched Looker and we did the POC rollout for a very specific purpose. But what we found was that as people got access to Looker, they wanted to start using it for themselves, for their own purposes, straight away, which is great, but it came with a bit of an unmanaged model proliferation. So people started building more and more models for their own specific purposes, and there was no coherence around it. So that was a bit of a challenge. The second thing was that I talked about those personas earlier. It turned out that those personas that we'd identified weren't quite sufficient to cover the various use cases. In particular, our sales squads want to be able to use Looker, want to be able to access data, but we hadn't really given them the necessary thought when we first thought about those personas. And then finally, we also had a persona that we deemed a product researcher. This wasn't something that we anticipated originally, but the product researcher is someone who wants early access to data. So typically when we make data available through Looker, it goes through various stages of refinement, but also various stages of checking. It goes through data integrity checks to make sure that if data is being exposed, we're confident that it's correct. People who want early access to data maybe are happy to accept that those data quality checks haven't taken place, but they still want to get that data and they want to get it alongside the more refined data. So for those people who are willing to accept those risks and have them explained to them, we developed the product researcher role as well. Another problem that we hadn't anticipated was that our core models became a bit of a bottleneck. So having one giant domain object that does everything for everyone became something that became a bit hard to manage, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a bit. Another thing we found was that there was a disjoint between domain knowledge among our LookML developers, so our data analysts. So in trying to build these core models, we were spanning multiple business areas, and it turns out that in AutoTrader at least, no one person knew everything about that domain. It took a series of people to kind of add the bits that they know about to get the full picture. And as a consequence of that, we found that there was a bit of lack of ownership in maintaining the LookML models, which meant that they started to get a bit untidy. Maybe there was some replication, bit of inconsistency. And then the final consideration was both performance and cost. So using BigQuery, the cost model is by data scanned. The more data you scan, the more it costs, and also probably the slower it's going to be to load. So what we found was that people were building dashboards that spanned large amounts of data over large periods of time, and that had the consequence that firstly dashboards were being slow to load, and also the costs for accessing that data started to increase. So how did we address that? Well, firstly, we created some new roles. Specifically for our sales teams, we created some new roles with some restricted permissions, partly because we didn't want potentially commercially sensitive information to be exposed to them, but also because we wanted to make the data as easy as possible to interpret. Typically, our sales teams who are accessing data are doing so. They're thinking about data from the perspective of our customers, so it's with that in mind that they want to interrogate the data. So we created those new roles with different permission levels and access to different underlying models. The other thing we did was embrace a domain-based data ownership concept. That's not just in Looker, but throughout the data flow journey through our pipeline. So trying to assign responsibility and ownership of that data to the domain and the business area in charge of that data. And then finally, to address performance concerns, we materialized some new tables in BigQuery for our most heavily used data-intensive dashboards. So another thing that was crucial to our success was training. And this is something that the data platform have embraced, not just for Looker, but for all our data products. And this data academy concept is something that was originally proposed by Airbnb, but it's something that we've embraced at AutoTrader. And the kind of reasoning behind that is that if you want to become a truly data-driven business, it's not possible to put a data scientist in every room, in every meeting. Instead, you've got to upskill your entire business to become data literate. So with that in mind, we've been running training courses around all our data products, as well as some core concepts around machine learning, statistics, etc. And we've been running various Looker-specific training courses. For our viewers, for our dashboard viewers, we tend to run training not for the dashboard or for Looker itself, but as part of a wider piece of training around how to have particular conversations with customers, for example. Explorer training we do run specifically around Looker, so we run a Looker for business users training course that introduces basic exploring concepts in Looker, as well as introducing some specific data sets at AutoTrader that are going to be most useful for the people that we're running for the training for. And then finally, for our developers, the LookML developers, we initially ran a training course, but we found that since then the number of people kind of being onboarded into that process is relatively low, so that we're able to run just peer training, so they just pair up with existing developers to get to grips with it, and that combined with some online resources is sufficient. One thing we have had to do, though, is give our LookML developers, so our data analysts, training in GitHub and how to raise pull requests and do code reviews. So that's something that's been really valuable, because I think that's a really good process to go through. So just to wrap up, I'm going to walk through a use case where we used Looker to replace an existing application. And the application was something called Performance Dashboard. This was a dashboarding tool internal to AutoTrader that we used to help our retailers, so our customers, understand how their adverts are performing. So this is really important for them because they want to know what's working for them and what's not, but it's also important for AutoTrader because we want to be able to demonstrate the value that we're offering our customers. So our retailer development and support squads have conversations regularly with customers about how well they're performing and how AutoTrader is performing for them. And historically how we did that was we had a bespoke legacy application that displayed the various charts that our RDS squads needed to have those conversations. But that application had been around for a long time. Its back end was deprecated, the systems it talked to were being decommissioned, and the front end had been unmaintained for a long time and had become de facto unmaintainable. So we needed to do something to replace it. And at this point, Looker was quite heavily embedded in the company, and we thought actually this would be a good use case to use Looker for. So we built a replacement for the performance dashboard tool. Looked something like this. So it was a series of 6 different tabs with relatively simple dashboards, data displayed in a very clear manner. You can see at the very top there it's pretty small, but we've got some filters that you can apply to filter that down to different customers. So our retailer development and support squads use these dashboards, change the filters, hit run, and the dashboard updates for the customer that they're talking to. And this was very successful. So Looker allowed us to replace this legacy bespoke application using a series of dashboards just sitting in Looker. Quite importantly, I think it's good to point out, the dashboard was built by our data analysts, so our LookML developers. Historically, to build something like that, we need a dev team, we need a team of back-end developers, front-end developers, working together, building a data store, etc. It's difficult to quantify exactly how long that would have taken, but it's quite a complex process, and it probably would have been a fairly significant piece of development endeavor. So we built these dashboards, and they're now in daily use by our RDS squads. Our CRM system actually links directly to the Looker dashboard, so they get easy access to it. We were able to leverage our existing data models for the most part, so we didn't have to bring any new data in. The data was already there. We were just able to repurpose it for this specific dashboard. And finally, it's just important to point out that the underlying data model that powers those dashboards is also able to be used by more advanced explorers to really drill down into the data. So a customer might be performing poorly, they might want to understand why. Using the explore functionality, we can then drill down into the underlying data to see exactly what's going on and see if there are any particular offending adverts, etc., to get a really detailed picture of what's going on. So that's all I had to say. Thank you very much.